How do organisms reproduce? Today we are going to discuss about another important life process, that is reproduction. So in the previous chapters we learnt about nutrition and other life processes that help the organism to survive. So an organism, it needs to carry out so many activities, so many life processes to stay alive. Now, what is this life process? What is this reproduction? How does it help the organisms? Here the lesson is, how do organisms reproduce? Before we learn how do organisms reproduce, first we need to know answer for a question: why do organisms reproduce? What is the need? An organism, to stay alive, it has to carry out so many activities. It needs to acquire food, it needs to acquire oxygen and all the basic necessary things. So it has to carry out so many reactions just to live for itself. It's a very difficult task, but it does. Every organism, it does. It acquires the food, it gets the oxygen, it gets the food, and it lives. And it reproduces. That means it produces another organism of its own kind. To reproduce a new organism, it needs a lot of energy. It needs a lot of materials. Even then, the organism efforts to acquire a lot of energy, to acquire a lot of materials to produce the young one of its own kind. What is the interest in producing the young ones of own kind? So here the question: why do organisms reproduce? If there is no reproduction, there is no diversity of life. There is a lot of diversity. We see various kinds of species of plants and animals. So in this world, if all the organisms are created only one without any ability to reproduce, if that organism dies, its existence is gone. No one identifies that. See, if there is only one single ant, you can't identify its existence. If there are groups and groups of ants, then you can identify its existence. Every species, it can get its significance when they are in large number. Every organism, it wants to perpetuate its race. Organisms want to perpetuate their race. Perpetuate their race. That means race in the sense, their race in the sense, their own species organisms. Tigers wanted to improve tiger population, humans wanted to increase human population, birds wanted to increase bird population. In such a way, every organism on this planet, it wants to produce its own kind in large number. That is the reason why organisms reproduce. Right? So we see the same thing in human beings also. That is the reason for increase in population. The human population is rapidly increased number of times in the past 1 decade, 100 years. In the past 100 years, you see that. In the past 1 century back, the population has grown drastically. So there are many reasons. Even humans reproduce to produce their young ones of their own kind, to produce their babies. You see, all plants, they produce seeds by which new plants are produced. Animals. So this reproduction, it helps the organisms to perpetuate their race, to continue their species. Otherwise, the continuity of the species is missing. The species will extinct, disappear. And this reproduction, whenever an organism, it produces another organism of its own kind. If it produces one organism X, it produces organism of another organism of same kind X. Will the newly formed organism and the parent organism are exactly identical? No, there are some differences. We will discuss what are the reasons for the differences. They may look similar. Organism X produces Y, which is similar to X. Y is similar to X, but not exactly identical. There are some differences. You may be similar to your father, but you are not exactly identical with your father. Your brother and you may be similar, but you both are not exactly identical. There are some differences. You are unique, your brother is unique, your father is unique, your mother is unique. Different, not matching with anyone on this planet. So, the reproduction, it brings variations, some changes in the organisms. These variation means little changes in the organisms. These variations, they help for the important process in biology, evolution of species. Variations are basis for the evolution of species. If these variations are not there, this many species are not evolved, even the human beings. We might have not been evolved into the Homo sapiens sapiens, human beings, if there are no variations. There are no variations if there is no reproduction. So that is the importance of reproduction. So that is the reason why do organisms reproduce. But here we learned one thing, reproduction is a complex process. It needs a lot of energy and materials. So this process is achieved by either plants and by animals, but in different ways, not in the same way. Plants, they have different mechanisms to reproduce. Animals, they have different mechanisms to reproduce. So here we have seen that organisms produce the young ones of their own kind. Whatever the reasons might be, they produce the young ones of their own kind, but the young ones are not identical to the parent. They are not exactly identical to the parent. But every organism produces the young ones of its own kind. Dog produces a dog, cat produces a cat, man produces a baby, but man cannot produce a dog, cat or rat. That means every organism produces the young one of its own kind, but it is not exactly identical. Now we are going to discuss about the reasons why they are not exactly identical. What are the reasons? Here the crucial part is the DNA. DNA is the deoxyribonucleic acid present inside the nucleus of a cell. This DNA is considered as the blueprint of our body design, which will decide the characteristic features of an organism. So while copying of this DNA in the process of reproduction, in the process of producing young ones, in this copying of DNA, there will be some variation, some changes. The copies of DNAs are not made exactly similar. That brings the variations, that brings the changes in the organisms of same kind, but some little variations. Let us see how it happens. And one more important point here we have to notice, organisms cannot produce exactly identical copies because reproduction, in the process of reproduction, two different organisms involve. If you take it as sexual reproduction, two organisms involve in the production of an young one. Two organisms. If it is sexual, two organisms. Male and female. So here, when these two produce an young one, so this young one, how this young one can be exactly identical to this or exactly identical to this? Because in the process of reproduction, two organisms involved in sexual reproduction, the DNAs of two organisms are mixed together to form a new DNA.